Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me once again today. Today we're going to take a look at another nation. We're continuing our Ulm series. So today we are going to look at Middle Age Ulm, the Forges of Ulm. So, story-wise, this is like 1500s, 1600s Germany, with, of course, a significant mythological twist. So this is Ulm after it was conquered by War, which then collapsed. And Ulm reemerged as a medieval-ish kingdom based around a religious, it's almost like it's militant atheism. Ulm is nationally anti-magic, anti-gods, anti-basically everything but just metal. Like, they have a metal religion, the Iron Cult, that worships steel. And so Middle Age Ulm kind of takes the partial theme of Early Age Ulm, where they had the better smiths and the better magical forging and the better armor than most people everywhere, and cranks it up to 11. Middle Age Ulm is a lot less about magic than Early Age Ulm was, and a lot more about troops, a lot more about resources, a lot more about high protection, all those qualities. So let's take a look at them. You have spies in Middle Age Ulm, which is a pretty neat little Benny. They're stealthier than normal scouts, and they have this spy ability, so when they hide in enemy lands, particularly in the capital, they can give you better information. Specifically, a spy hiding in the enemy capital will give you access to some of that nation's score graphs. They have Commanders of Ulm. Commanders of Ulm are expensive, but do have 80 leadership, which isn't terribly usual. And they have a huge variety of them. They have the regular Commanders of Ulm. They have the Commanders of Ulm in full black steel plate. They have the Commanders of Ulm with flails, and the flail ones with black steel plate. So they have 4 different varieties of just regular old Commanders of Ulm. They also have Black Lords, which are the commander version of their Black Knight units. They are hugely expensive, but they're one of the better heavy cavalry in the game, especially because they have Protection 23. Notice that Ulm units do retain low magic resistance, like they had in the Early Age. In the Middle Age, their magic resistance is lower than average. Ulm's mages are an interesting lot. First of all, we have the Lord Guardian. Ulm doesn't have sacreds. Ulm has anti-sacreds. So the Lord Guardians have black halberds, which do AP fatigue damage to gods and sacred units in an area of effect. And they also have this Halt Heretic aura, which is awe, but it only affects sacreds. Which is kind of an interesting ability, but not terribly useful a lot of the time. Lord Guardians also have a very significant siege defense bonus. They basically count as 3 people when defending forts. And the Guardians, the troop version of them, also have that, so they also count as 3 people when defending forts. Mage-wise, Ulm has Black Acolytes, which are just Holy One sacred priests. They have Master Smiths, and Middle Age Ulm's Master Smiths are significantly better than Early Age Ulm's Master Smiths. For one thing, they start with 3 paths, and then they have a 20% random. So automatically, they're 3-path mages, which makes them as good as the best Master Smiths from Early Age Ulm. They have decent research. They are also mundane researchers, so you don't lose research points from these guys for having a drain scale as Middle Age Ulm, which is very, very interesting when it comes to pretender design. They have a 10-point resource bonus instead of a 5-point resource bonus, and their forge bonus is 2 instead of 1. That's actually really, really big, because it means that Master Smiths can produce basic 5 gem items for 1 gem when equipped with a Dwarven Hammer. So Middle Age Ulm, Early Age Ulm could spam out magical items. Middle Age Ulm can literally double that production when it comes to the basic items. Fire in a jar, black steel plate, great swords of sharpness or other basic weapons. More importantly, girdles of might. You can produce earth boots for 6 gems, which is very, very cheap. But girdles of might are a reinvigoration item that you can produce for 1 gem and just put on literally every mage. It's a significant boost. And of course, having 3 guaranteed paths means your Master Smiths are always useful. If you want to go into combat with them, they can forge themselves a 1-gem fire in a jar, then hand their hammer to somebody else, put the fire in a jar on. That will let them cast Phoenix Pyre, and then they're high enough level to cast Magma Eruption, which is quite an effective area of effect evocation. You also have Master Masons, which are only 1 recruitment point. They have a big siege bonus. They count as 30 men while sieging. They have a siege strength of 30 and a siege defense strength of 10. And they have the Mason ability, so they can create advanced forts. Now, Ulm starts with a very advanced fort, with a 3 command point fort. So you can recruit a mage and a half every turn, or 3 1 recruitment point guys, 3 commanders, 3 black lords, 3 master masons. You will never have the spare resources to recruit 3 black lords in 1 turn. It's a little bit of a silly concept. In any case, the Lord Guardians we've already looked at. Then you have these 2 interesting little fellows here. The Black Priests have 1 earth and 2 holy, and a 10% chance of a random. They don't have a forging bonus. They have an Inquisitor bonus instead, so their priest level is doubled for the purpose of removing other faiths, other dominion. So for removing other dominion, they're effectively holy level 4. The interesting thing about Black Priests is that Ulm has a national spell, 2 national spells actually, that they can cast. Actually, Ulm has 3 national spells. 2 of them are, and all 3 are actually quite important. But Black Priests are, the Earth Holy Crosspath is incredibly important for Middle Age Ulm. And you have Priest Smiths. And Priest Smiths are literally Master Smiths, but also Priest level 1. Their Forge bonus is lower, but they are still mundane researchers. They are sacred, so blessable, and they retain 2 Earth and 1 Holy. Before we look at the units, we're going to go on into Pretender creation so that we can look at spells, because Ulm has some national spells. As I said, Iron Darts is the first one, level 3 evocation, level 1 Earth and level 1 Holy, and it shoots out 3 at the basic level, 3 projectiles that do 13 magical armor-piercing damage and double damage versus magic beings at precision plus 5. This is an extremely effective evocation, especially because it is low fatigue cost. Your Priest Smiths in particular are extremely good at casting it because they're Earth 2, so they get 5 projectiles instead of 3. And the fatigue cost for them is 5. It's halved. So Iron Darts is an effective spell. It's, you can compare it to Magma Bolts. It is more effective than Magma Bolts. It's more accurate. You get more shots with a Priest Smith. It does less damage, but its damage is armor piercing. So against any reasonable amount of protection, it actually ends up doing as much damage, if not a little bit more. And it costs less fatigue. So Iron Darts, good spell, solid spell. Then at level 6 we get Iron Blizzard. Same path cost. Any one of your Sacred Mages can cast it. It shoots 30 effects that are armor piercing. They only do 10 damage this time, but Iron Blizzard, compare Iron Blizzard to Blade Wind. It is a straight upgrade. Blade Wind costs a good deal more fatigue, does not do armor piercing damage, it does have more effects, but at lower precision. Range 35. Iron Blizzard is a little bit shorter range, a little fewer effects, but it increases by 5 for every extra level of the caster. And it does armor-piercing magical damage, so it hits ethereal units. And it doubles damage versus magic beings, i.e. most summons. What this means is Black Priests and Priest Smiths in particular are effectively artillery. A single Priest Smith who is casting this for 25 fatigue, remember, and has a reinvigoration item, and has cast Earth Power, so has reinvigoration like 8 or 10. A Priest Smith can cast this spell 4 or 5 times without really slowing down, and effectively put out the same kind of damage as about 100 crossbows. I'm not even exaggerating. Okay, maybe it's 80 crossbows, but still, it's a lot of damage. And in particular, if your enemy is relying on summons, which is very common in the mid and late game, Iron Blizzard wipes them out. In fact, Iron Blizzard wipes out nearly everything. In order to deal with 10 armor-piercing damage reliably, you have to have about 24 protection, which nobody has except, funnily enough, Middle Age Ulm. So Iron Blizzard is a fantastic spell. Also, Middle Age Ulm has... where is it? What school is it in? Tempering the Will. It's 3 Earth. It hits the entire battlefield, costs no gems. and it increases magic resistance. Now, magic resistance negates it easily, but it has very little fatigue cost, and Ulm's troops have low magic resistance in the first place. So if you have a couple guys wearing earth boots on the battlefield, before you start spamming Iron Blizzard while everyone's kind of walking into range and all that, you just cast Tempering the Will about 4 times. And that means the majority of your troops will now have above average magic resistance as opposed to below average magic resistance. It goes a long way towards negating one of Ulm's national weaknesses. In terms of troops, Middle Age Ulm is arguably the strongest troop lineup in the game, and I include all 3 ages there. They can recruit war dogs, which are very ineffective but hilarious. Oh, also their dogs have protection 15 because they wear male barding. So they're like, yeah, they're not great, but they're shockingly sturdy for the cost. And they're size 1, so you can fit 6 of them in a square and have 6 attacks out of 1 square. It's a little silly. However, the standard infantry of Ulm, they're standard basic infantry. When you look at them, you notice a couple of things. There's 2 things I notice first. First, I notice resources 27. Infantry of Ulm are incredibly resource intensive. And second is protection 19. Infantry of Ulm have better protection than heavy cavalry. Most knights don't have armor this heavy. And they only cost 10 gold. So they're entirely 100% resource limited. They're not going to cost you much money, and they don't die. Infantry of Ulm are pretty much the hardest standard infantry to kill in large numbers in the game, except for Black Plate Infantry, which are exactly the same unit, except they cost a bunch more resources, and their protection is 23. Literally invincible to many, if not most, human troops. A lot of human troops actually can't hurt Black Plate Infantry unless their dice explode. Unless they roll, if a Black Plate Infantry rolls 0 on their protection roll, then most other human infantry can inflict chip damage. But Black Plate Infantry are the next best thing to invincible, like the closest Dominions gets, especially because you have 2 earth magic everywhere as Ulm. And so, you can just send some Master Smiths or something with the army, wearing earth boots or just cast earth power, and then have them spam Legions of Steel on your big blocks of infantry. And Legions of Steel on a Black Plate Infantryman makes him protection 26. And protection 26 is absurd. It's extremely difficult to handle. So, in the early and mid game, Ulm's strategy is extremely simple. You form big blocks of infantry, and you can pick which weapon you like for what situation you need. You have mauls, which do high bludgeoning damage. You have battle axes, which do slashing damage. And you have flails, which get 2 attacks that have a bonus versus enemies with shields, albeit they do lower damage. For general purpose use, the flail guys are probably your best bet. You also have guys with shields, in case you're worried about missiles, which you shouldn't be because you're Ulm. And you have guys with Morning Stars and shields that get that attack bonus against other shields. You also have Pikeneers. In Dominions 4, these guys were the bread and butter of Ulmish armies because the way repel worked meant that having a big block of pikemen was extremely effective because they could repel most attacks, because everybody in the square got to repel each attack. Since repel has been changed, Pikeneers are no longer the go-to. I would say the flail guys are better than the pikes, but the pikes are still an option. They still exist. They're still not bad. None of Ulm's infantry are bad. The Pikeneers are just not the best anymore. Ulm also has recruitable crossbowmen, and specifically they have recruitable crossbowmen with really heavy protection. What this means is if you have the resources to recruit a bunch of them, Ulm can win shootouts pretty effectively. Now, Ulmish arbalests only get 1 attack every 3 rounds instead of 1 attack every 2 rounds, like standard crossbows do. However, they hit like trucks. They do 15 armor-piercing damage. In order to take on average 0 damage from this hit, you have to have protection like 40. In fact, I'm not sure 40 would do it. It depends on the order, which I don't know which order the armor piercing and the piercing damage quality are applied. But if the piercing quality is applied first, then 40 won't do it. Well, nah, then if the piercing quality is applied first, then 40 would just barely do it. So yeah, you literally need 36 plus to 40 protection in order to negate this attack. It's incredibly powerful. That said, Arbalests aren't even Ulm's most effective option. Ulm's most effective option when it comes to crossbows are actually Sappers, who have even heavier protection, also have a massive siege bonus, so they siege with the strength of 6 men, and have crossbows that fire more quickly, plus having, just being better. They're expensive in resources and recruitment points, extremely expensive, especially compared to the recruitment points that everything else costs, which is 9. All of these Ulmish infantry cost 10 gold and 9 recruitment points. The only limiter on Ulmish production is resources, unless they're producing a ton of Sappers, or Black Knights, which are their elite heavy cavalry. And Black Knights are very good elite heavy cavalry. Once again, they're incredibly resource intensive, and they also cost a lot of recruitment points, but they're extremely powerful. They are, I believe, capital only. No, I'm wrong. You can recruit Black Knights everywhere. That shows you how much I play Middle Age Ulm. So, Ulm has, of all the nations in the game, I think Ulm is the simplest, Middle Age Ulm. Ulm has an incredibly straightforward, simple game plan. When you're building your god, you do this. You take Production 3 and Drain 3. Drain doesn't hurt you, because your researchers, your master smiths, and your priest smiths, who you want to be recruiting most of the time anyway, have mundane researcher. So Drain just doesn't affect you, except in that Drain gives extra magic resistance and fatigues mages, which helps you more because your troops are extremely powerful, and having low magic resistance is a notable weakness of yours. So in your Dominion, having Drain that increases magic resistance is a net positive for you, because your troops will beat anybody else's so long as the mages don't get involved. I think that's a statement I'll stand by. There is no other nation that has standard troops that can beat Ulms. If you're talking about Ashdod's Sacreds, if you're going up against Anakites, Anakites can fight Black Plate infantry very effectively because they have really high strength, and so they can punch through that protection. That said, Ulm's infantry do better against Anakites than anybody else's infantry. If you have a whole bunch of Black Plate infantry with battle axes, or Black Plate infantry with flail, well, probably the battle axes. Black Plate infantry with battle axes will kill Anakites. They'll chop them down over time. It still won't be super efficient because Anakites are super powerful, but it can be done, and Ulm is one of the very few nations that can conceivably do that with standard infantry. Also, Ulm has Guardians, and Guardians have that fatigue damage effect, the Bane of Heresy. It hits the whole square. If you have a whole bunch of Guardians together, and they're not notably more expensive than your standard infantry, except in gold and recruitment points, if you gather a bunch of Guardians together, enemy Sacreds will hit the line of Guardians and basically detonate. Because first they attack and fail to get through 23 protection, and then the Guardians all swing, and the Bane of Heresy goes off whether the attack hits or not. So no matter what your defense skill is, if a square with 3 Guardians in it all swing black halberds at you, you're taking 3 hits of 15 AP fatigue damage, which probably means your fatigue just went up by like 30, which means next round your attack and defense skills are lower, you're more vulnerable to critical hits, and then it happens again and again. Inside of 4 or 5 combat rounds, which Guardians are likely to survive because of their super high protection, inside that time, pretty much every Sacred in the game is asleep. And then they get murdered because they're asleep and can't wake up because they're constantly being fatigued again. Guardians are good at that. So, Ulm's game plan, like I said, you build huge blocks of infantry that's incredibly hard to kill, you march them forward, you have master smiths to buff them, or more powerfully, you have priest smiths, and the priest smiths lay down a buff or two, including blessing themselves with probably reinvigoration or something, and then they start spamming Iron Blizzard. Or Iron Darts, if Iron Darts is what you have access to. 5 or 6 or 10 Priest Smiths spamming Iron Blizzard will kill pretty much anything that can conceivably be killed by damage. If it is theoretically vulnerable to 10 armor-piercing damage, Priest Smiths casting Iron Blizzard will kill it. It's just that simple. So there's a huge fraction, like, I don't know, I'm just pulling a number out of the thin air here, but 50 or 60% of the things in the game are countered by Priest Smiths. And that's Ulm's basic game plan, is to move forward with some of the best troops in the game, backed up by one of the best evocations in the game, and other evocations as they want them, and win battles through sheer grindy, forward-facing combat power. Now, late game, Middle Age Ulm starts to fall off, and that's because the only access they have to paths outside Earth and Fire comes from randoms on Master Smiths. Priest Smiths don't even get randoms. Black Priests do get a random, but very rarely. Black Acolytes don't get any randoms, so it's 1 Fire, 2 Earth. That's about it. Then sometimes they'll get 1 Air or 1 Astral. Sometimes they'll get 3 Earth. Sometimes they'll get 2 Fire. But this is not impressive magical access. What this means is, unless you build a Pretender specifically to do something else, Middle Age Ulm is basically stuck in that plan I just outlined. They've got Earth buffs, they've got Iron Blizzard, and they've got Magma spells. And that's pretty much it. Late game, Ulm can form some communions by scraping together Astral Random Master Smiths, and Astral Random Master Smiths can forge some basic Astral Booster gear, which can help you break into Astral. But really, in order to accomplish much with that, you need to also find Astral Random Indies, like Crystal Amazons or Lizards or something. As Middle Age Ulm, it's absolutely worth going to war over those people, in my opinion. Lizard Shamans, Crystal Amazons, Sages, libraries that can recruit Sages and those kinds of mages. There's another one that's I've forgotten what his name is, but there's a Super Sage. In any case, Astral Independence, definitely worth fighting a war over. Particularly because early and mid-game wars, Middle Age Ulm can win. They can win in a very simple way. It's a matter of, do you have the resources? And I mean literally, the resources to win this war. And if you do, then your chances are really good. Now, who does Middle Age Ulm not like fighting? Well, they don't like fighting people with a whole lot of armor-piercing or armor-negating magic. And they don't like fighting people who can do things like poisoning them easily. So, air magic? Ulm sometimes has a tough time against air magic because their troops are vulnerable to shock damage. They rely very heavily on that hugely high protection, and when that is negated by, say, thunderstrikes or lightning bolts, they suffer, especially because with that huge resource cost, they're likely to have less infantry than most people. They're vulnerable to people who don't rely on sacreds, because Ulm usually feels compelled to spam out Guardians to defend against sacreds, and against non-sacreds, Guardians are not particularly more effective than standard Black Plate infantry, but they cost twice as much, and you recruit them much more slowly. So there's that. In general, well, like I've said, if you can beat it with mass evocations or a straight infantry grind out, Ulm can beat it. It's people that you can't beat in that way that Ulm struggles against. Research-wise, Ulm definitely wants Evocation, because there's lots of good Fire, Earth, and Fire-Earth crosspath spells in Evocation, including Iron Darts and Iron Blizzard. Evocation level 6 should be an early target. To get both Magma Eruption and Iron Blizzard, those two spells can carry you pretty hard for a while. Rain of Stones is also a spell that Ulm can cast, because some of their Master Smiths get that air random, and then you can slap a pair of Earth Boots on them, and now they can cast Rain of Stones to disrupt other people's casting. At the high end, none of these spells are easy for Ulm to get. Potentially, with some boosting and or empowering, you could get Chain Lightning. You might be able to get Storm, Orb Lightning, I don't know. Generally, you're stuck with Earth and fire. Ulm definitely does want alteration as well, because, of course, alteration is the best school for Earth. Earth Meld early on will win you wars. Iron Skin, excellent buff. Destruction early on. Ulm doesn't really want to be casting Destruction continuously because they rely so much on armor that friendly fire from Destruction really, really hurts them. But Curse of Stones is a fantastic spell if you can spam it, which Ulm often can. Lightning Resistance really, really covers one of their weaknesses because it stops their infantry from being stunned by nearby lightning bolts. Maws of the Earth is an incredibly good damage spell that does high levels of armor-piercing damage and also applies the Earth Meld effect. There's lots of good stuff that Ulm can do with Earth Magic, especially because Earth Magic is relatively simple to buff, especially if you build your Pretender for it. You've got Earth Boots, you've got Summon Earth Power. Those two in combination will push any of your mages up to Earth 4, and every single one of them can both forge Earth Boots, every single one of your smiths, that is, can both forge Earth Boots and cast Earth Power. Thaumaturgy. Ulm needs Thaumaturgy 1 in order to get Communion Master and Communion Slave. Also, Far Strike can be kind of a hilarious spell early on in the game for Astral Random Master Smiths. Not hugely useful, but funny, because you can just reach through and punch somebody from across the whole battlefield really, really hard. I mean, it's 17 damage plus strength, so about 28 or so. 29. You can go up Thaumaturgy higher. You don't really need to, at least not until the end of the game. You do want Tempering the Will. So hitting Thaumaturgy 5 by the mid-game when people start pulling out magic resistance negate spells is valuable. Beyond that, unless you lucked into Astral Randoms early, you don't really need any of this. If you did luck into Astral Randoms early, Paralyze is a good spell, Soul Slay is a good spell. You may struggle killing things that can't easily be killed by Iron Blizzard and or infantry. Soul Slay can be your way out of that jam. And of course Ulm wants Construction. Ulm wants Construction 2 like immediately. They want Construction 4 early. Eventually they want Construction 8. Middle Age Ulm's late game plan should involve putting up Forge of the Ancients. Probably they want to put up Earthblood Deepwell if that's at all possible, to get that Earth Gem income. And they will want Weapons of Sharpness, because Weapons of Sharpness greatly decreases the category of things that Ulm's infantry can't deal with. Weapons of Sharpness is a fantastic buff. It does require Earth 5, so it'll take a lot of boosting to get up to the point where you can cast Weapons of Sharpness reliably, but it makes all of the weapons of the people who are hit by it, it makes their attacks magical and armor piercing. So let's look at, for example, Flail Guys. They get 2 attacks, so 6 attacks per square, damage 16, bludgeoning. I think Weapons of Sharpness works on bludgeoning damage. It should. But even, let's just look at the battle axes, just because I actually don't entirely remember whether Weapons of Sharpness works on bludgeoning weapons. I think it does. Pretty sure it does. But let's look at the battle axes anyway. 3 attacks per square, 22 damage. That's pretty high. That said, there are things with high protection that can deal with that. Well, if it's armor piercing, then in order to, on average, not take damage, you need 44 protection, which nothing has. I mean, maybe some crazy, super buffed, super combatant wearing every piece of protection increasing equipment in the game and stacking all 3, bark skin, stone skin, iron skin spells on top of himself. Maybe then they'd have 44 protection. But anything that's kind of in the game normally, if you cast Weapons of Sharpness on Black Plate Infantry, they can kill it, and they will kill it. So, I've talked a lot about Middle Age Ulm, and I think I've made it out to sound quite strong. It is quite strong. It's especially, I think, strong for new players, because, as I said, the game plan is so very simple. You do have to figure out what you're doing in the late game, and that will rely heavily on your randoms and whatever independent mages you've been able to find, but your basic game plan stays pretty much the same the whole game, and it's fairly potent, especially for, as simple as it is. My beef with Middle Age Ulm is honestly that they're boring. I think, and this is just personal opinion, you might consider me wrong, that's fine. I don't like the fact that Middle Age Ulm is so simple and straightforward. And I don't think they're very interesting. Like, as Middle Age Ulm, what you do for research is you go through every school and you stop at every fire and earth spell you see and go like, can I cast that easily? So you go down Conjuration, you're like, okay, summon ogres, could be useful. Phoenix power, yup. Summon earth power, definitely yes. Summon earth elemental, also definitely yes. Conjuration 5, really good for everybody for the elemental summoning reasons. Actually less good for Ulm than most, although they can summon fire elementals, but it's not nearly as easy. You go into Alteration and they're like, okay, earth spells, Earth Meld, Iron Skin, Stone Skin back up here, yep, Stone Skin, Destruction, Curse of Stones, Temper Flesh, Maws of the Earth, Lightning Resistance, ooh, that one's big. Definitely going to want some alteration. And that's just how you go through the magic. You just go, okay, what can I potentially get to with Earth 2? Boom. That's your research list. That's your priorities. Everything else, kind of secondary. It's just whatever you can get with Earth 2. And I don't like how focused the nation is. And how, like, this, mandatory. If you don't have Production 3 and Drain 3, you're playing Ulm wrong. I don't like to say that, but the nation is clearly designed with these scales in mind. You have to have the bonus resources. If you don't have, like, as many bonus resources as possible, you can't recruit troops. If you don't take Drain 3, you're basically just leaving points on the table, because Drain 3 doesn't hurt Ulm. These guys can be recruited everywhere. They ignore Drain completely. These guys can only be recruited in your capital, but you'll want to be recruiting them almost all the time because of their cross paths. They ignore Drain completely. These guys can only be recruited in the capital and don't ignore Drain, but they're already not good researchers, and you don't recruit them to research. You recruit them to have Holy 2. So yeah, it's very, very straightforward. When you're playing Ulm, another thing to note, your units have lost the cold resistance that EA Ulm has. Early Age Ulm had cold resistance 5 on almost all their units. Middle Age Ulm does not, so don't necessarily jump straight to cold 3. Although, for point reasons, I probably would max out the heat scale in one direction or the other. So, what stops Ulm? What do you have to be wary of? Well, the first thing is death magic. And I say that mainly because all of your units have high encumbrance, ranging from 5 to 6. Black Knights only have 4, which is nice, and your crossbowmen and sappers only have 4, but 4 is still fairly high. So your troops are sleepy, basically. They fight. Black Plate Infantry gets 15 rounds of melee combat before they start to fall asleep. What that means is the spell that you hate most in the world is Rigor Mortis. Especially because you don't have native nature, so you usually can't cast Relief, which is the spell that counteracts that. Rigor Mortis, Heat from Hell, Curse of Stones. Curse of Stones is extra effective against you because your magic resistance is low, especially if somebody is holding some magic plus penetration gear, like a Rune Smasher, and an Eye of the Void, or just a spell focus. In particular, if they've stacked all 3 of those things and they cast Curse of Stones, your army is going to be asleep very quickly. If you're up against a Death Nation, like Middle Age Tis, and they cast Rigor Mortis, your army is going to be asleep very quickly, and there's nothing you can do about it. So the one-dimensional approach is very strong in its way. It also has these very, very obvious counters. If you're up against a big Fire Nation and they cast Heat from Hell, your army is probably going to be asleep pretty quickly, unless you stack some fire resistance on everybody, which you can do, but the point remains. You understand what I'm getting at. It's a very simple army, very strong in its way, but it also has this one very simple counter. The other way to affect that counter is basically just to spam out enough chaff that Ulm's infantry can't hack through it. Iron Blizzard helps with that a lot. Iron Blizzard clears chaff out with incredible speed, so usually the only way to accomplish that is to have like 20 death mages all spamming Horde of Skeletons on the field at the same time. In which case it can still be done. But, yeah, I don't know. I think this is a little bit shorter than most of my other nation analysis videos, just because that's it. That's Ulm. They forge real good. They bash real good with infantry. They spam evocations real good. And when that stops carrying them, they begin to have trouble. Mastersmith randoms are nice, and they provide something of an alternative plan, but not a huge alternative plan. When you're creating a god for Ulm, Ulm gets some of the best expander chassis. They get dragons, they get the thrice-horned boar, they get the son of Fenrir. So taking an expander is an extremely viable option, especially because in the early game, those really good troops of yours are going to be really slow to mass. Another strategy is to take the Svartalf Mastersmith, which I pretty much recommend to every nation that can. The Svartalf Mastersmith, for one thing, breaks you into death. For another thing, can have high earth. And for a third thing, has full slots in his Svartalf form, except for missing one miscellaneous slot. So, if you take him, you can have a death economy, and taking death 4 gives him the ability to do all the death things you want him to. You take Earth 5, now you can take either, now you can take a Reinvigoration Bless is really what you do. I mean, your only sacred units are mages, and what they're doing is spamming evocations, so you just take Reinvigoration, basically. And then, like, Undead Command or Undying or something, like, whatever, it doesn't matter here. Your Death Bless is irrelevant. And then you take 4 or 5 points of Dominion, and you take Growth, and you tank Misfortune like always, and now you have a bunch of extra points. You can take those points and you can break into another path with your Lenormand. You could break into Nature, which might not be a bad idea. You could make sure you have decent astral access. If you do this, make sure he never fights another in a major battle against a human player, but he has high magic resistance. He'd probably be okay anyway. Magic Duel would kill him if he had Astral 4. Or you can just take it and pump it into Scales. You can take Order 2. You still have 27 points left, which you can spend on one path in something or other. Probably Astral, to be honest. Actually, probably Blood. And, yeah, this guy works. Undying doesn't help you. Just take Undead Command. So that once you start up your death economy, you can, I don't know, summon some undead or something. Middle Age Ulm doesn't have any other death mages, but he has it natively, you might as well use it. This is a perfectly viable Middle Age Ulm. All this guy does is he breaks you into the really high-level death spells. He can cast the Hidden Beneath, Hidden in Sand spells. He has a point of blood, so if necessary, you can use him. If he gets a bunch of afflictions or something, you can blood hunt up until he can cast Blood Feast and heal all his afflictions. Otherwise, that's unimportant. However, as a very, very late game plan, which otherwise Ulm lacks, if you take Blood 3 on him, then he can blood hunt a little bit and eventually maybe summon a Vampire Lord or something. It'll kind of depend on what happens in the game. But, yeah, anything like this will do it. Your troops are a lot slower than in the early age. You've lost the survivals, you've lost the cold resistance. So you're just going to be you have map move 8. So you're just going to be marching around the map at 1 province per turn with your giant blobs of infantry, stacking earth buffs on them and casting Iron Blizzard to support them, and that is going to be your whole mid-game. As soon as you hit Evocation 6, that's what you do. In fact, you do it before you hit Evocation level 6. You just do it better once you hit Evocation level 6. And then you, in the late game, you basically hope to be big enough that you can make it, even though you don't have access to most of the late game paths. You have some Astral, like I said. You can forge, I think, crystal coins to boost your Astral. At worst, you might have to empower somebody once or twice, but you can do something with Astral in the late game. The late game is where you'll tend to falter, but in the mid-game, Middle Age Ulm is incredibly powerful. So you kind of want to try and beat up a couple of other nations before other people start hitting like level 7 and level 8 research, and start really coming down on you hard. Other options besides the Lenormand, like I said, you can take an Awake Expander in the Thrice-Horned Boar. He gives you nature magic and high-level earth. You could take a dragon for whatever kind of magic you wanted to expand. You could take an Immobile, but I wouldn't really recommend it. For Ulm, I feel like an Expander is probably your best choice, if for no other reason than because you just want to grab your cap circle as quickly as possible. If you wanted to take something else, I would consider taking a rainbow. The Eldest Dwarf gives you basically all the rainbow and forging capacity that the... Oh, I forgot the other thing about the Svartalf Mastersmith. He has Mastersmith 1, so he has higher paths for the purpose of crafting. So you could take him as an expander, and you don't even have to do this. I mean, you could take 4 there, kill that. You've got good scales, you have 99 points left, and you can give him some rainbow paths. So you can take some astral, you can take some nature, you could take like a point of, I don't know, fire. That lets you forge skulls of fire to boost death or something. Anything that you're interested in forging. So after expansion, he can now retire to a lab, research, because he has a whole bunch of research points, and forge things. You don't really need much help forging things, but he can kind of boost you into stuff earlier than you would otherwise have been able to. One useful way to do this might be to take Blood 3 and forge Bloodstones, which are an extra earth booster that otherwise you wouldn't have good access to. You know, just spitballing kind of. You only need Blood 2 to do that, actually, so you can still take Nature 1. So there's lots of things that the Lenormand, or if you're not interested in the expander aspect, the Eldest Dwarf is basically the Svartalf Mastersmith, just minus the monster. All he is a rainbow, but he's a cheap rainbow who has a forge bonus, so there's that. So that's about it for Middle Age Ulm. Next time we're going to move into Late Age Ulm, which is a complete shift in what they do and how they do it. And it's interesting how that transition changes. I mean, how that transition happens, I should say. The transition itself doesn't change. Ignore me. It's interesting how the ages change, because in the early age, of course, Ulm still has some of these features. They still have a lot of earth magic. They have forge bonuses. They have relatively heavily armored troops for the time, although not exceptionally heavily armored. There are plenty of troops in the early age who have 10 to 16 protection. In the Middle Age, Ulm is, and my point was, in the early age, Ulm is a lot less focused. They have a lot more stuff. They branch out more. They have more elemental paths. They have death. They have nature. There's a lot of stuff going on, even though they have relatively few units and commanders. In the Middle Age, Ulm is extremely focused. They have a lot more units and a lot more things kind of here, but it all boils down to a couple pretty focused strategies. In the Late Age, Ulm is very different, and we'll talk about that next time, but in the Late Age, Ulm is a blood nation, they're a death nation, they're an astral nation. They're almost the opposite of Middle Age Ulm, although they do still retain some things from the Middle Age, but we will talk about that in the next video. So thanks for watching. If you like what I'm doing, considering subscribing to the channel, consider checking out the Patreon and supporting me if you like. I appreciate it. I'm sure you'll derive some kind of satisfaction from it deep in your soul. But whether you do or not, I will see you in the next video. Alright, I'm sorry, there's actually one other aspect of Middle Age Ulm that I forgot to mention. Because, honestly, I don't think it's all that effective. But, Middle Age Ulm does have a national summon. It's the Iron Angel. It comes at Conjuration 8. It requires level 5 Earth and level 2 Astral. And what it does is it gives you this Iron Angel commander. The good things about him are he's extremely tough, he has high hit points, he has 2 attacks, one of which murders magical beings and has the Bane of Heresy effect. He has protection 26. And he has all these resistances. He resists fire, he resists shock, he halts heretics in a very, very powerfully. Like, sacreds can't hurt him hardly at all. He reinvigorates, and he flies. So he's good. Here's the problem. He's very late game. He's kind of expensive. And he has no magic whatsoever. And he can't get any magic. Like, his path boost -10, I think means you can't even empower him. He has a cool attack sprite, though. He's got that going for him. But basically, the Iron Angel is a thug chassis, but it's an expensive thug chassis that comes very late in the game and doesn't have the qualities that make for a super good thug, because it doesn't have any magic. Now, of course, since Middle Age Ulm can forge items for super cheap, it is viable to equip Iron Angels and turn them into thugs. I still don't think it's very efficient. And I think if you waste a whole lot of time doing that, I don't know. I'm unconvinced by Iron Angels. I've tried them a couple of times. They do good work as thugs, but I always feel like, you know, I could have taken those 25 gems and turned them into items, or turned them into earth elementals, or turned them into castings of Maws of the Earth on the battlefield, or other ritual spells, or summoned a whole bunch of troops, or... I feel like there's better uses for Earth Gems, basically. And I feel like as Middle Age Ulm, you already tend to run short of Earth Gems because there's so many things you want to do with them. So... I think Iron Angels are funny since they're a divine being that teaches men not to trust in religion, which is extremely paradoxical. But then the Iron Cult in general is very paradoxical. Anyway, I just wanted to go back and mention this because I know somebody was going to point it out if I didn't. Which is fair. Keep me on my toes, guys. But overall, I don't think Iron Angels are super important to the functioning of Middle Age Ulm, and I don't think they're super effective. So, take it for what it is. In any case, I'll see you in the next video.